Thank you, Madam Secretary and Chairman Powell, for being here. First of all, I want to associate myself with the comments of Senator Kennedy, specifically about the importance of the independence, Mr. Chairman. I know you and I have talked about this in the past, and it's just really critical. And I applaud you for your discipline in that. What I wanted to talk about today a little bit is that the banking agencies, of course, are starting to roll back last year's regulatory measures that responded to pandemic stresses. And as you know, we made some temporary, provided some temporary relief. And we're hearing now that community banks are under leverage ratio stress because of the influx of deposits, which, of course, they're holding largely at very low risk in very low risk assets, and of course, somewhat because of their strong commitment to the PPP lending. So as the banks continue to work with their customers and communities, I'm just wondering, what factors will you consider in deciding how to address leverage ratio pressures, and how much lead time will the banks and their customers get to adapt to these ad hoc decisions? And I can start with either one of you. Can start. Maybe start with you, Mr. Chairman.
Right. So on the community bank leverage ratio, that's something we'll be watching carefully, and we'll communicate it well ahead of time. And we're well aware of those stresses.
Very good. Well, thanks. Well, Secretary Yellen, then I'm going to ask you another question, and if you want to address the CBLR as well, that'd be great. But you've made, of course, addressing climate change one of the central points of your time at Treasury. It's been reported that President Biden's climate czar, John Kerry, has encouraged banks and other investment institutions to form a net zero banking alliance. He's also urged banks to provide as much support for alternative energy projects as possible, which seems to be at the expense of more traditional energy projects, and possibly even forcing financial institutions to put political and social considerations ahead of sound business practices. And that would, of course, be a violation of their fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders. So in light of this weak unemployment numbers, do you think it's a good idea for private businesses to be forced by a government official, or even encouraged by one, to make decisions about where they should or should not put their money, jeopardizing jobs in our energy and other sectors of the economy that are, legal commerce, represent legal commerce and industries and businesses?
Well, Senator Cramer, I think the world faces a profound crisis in connection with climate, and it is appropriate for government, the private sector as well, to focus on how we can mitigate the risks, to encourage banks and financial institutions, lenders more generally, to think about the potential adverse impacts of investments that they may make, and perhaps more importantly, to understand that eventually we are committed to going to net zero emissions by 2050, and that can affect the returns that they receive on investments. I don't think that's inappropriate, but there are no requirements by government that I'm aware of to force anyone to lend for any particular project, or not to lend to businesses that are involved in carbon emitting activities.
Well, there certainly are some very strong suggestions that border on pressure at the very least. And of course, a lot of these bigger banks are responding to that pressure and to market forces as well. But that said, I might just bring up a scenario in, say, a cold place like North Dakota, or anywhere in the Midwest for that matter. When we get to times where there's a very like a polar vortex, as some people like to call it, we just call it winter, or for that matter, you get a peak hot summer stretch when the baseload electricity that people used to rely on to keep their companies running, their manufacturing facilities going, or the gas that used to be the feedstock for a manufacturer becomes fuel for generating electricity. That could have a pretty negative impact on the companies, the manufacturers, the server farms, who suddenly find themselves with rolling blackouts. So I just hope that we can take a whole approach to these things and not try to pick entire categories of industries that, as we talk about, particularly as we talk about fair access to banking.
Well, I agree. This is a process that will unfold over time gradually, and we need to take account of those impacts.
Thank you for your consideration. Again, thanks to both of you for being here and for your service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cramer. We just call it winter. Thanks for making Tina and me laugh. I noticed she laughed and I laughed. Moran didn't get it, so he didn't laugh. But Senator Smith is recognized from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Senator Smith definitely got the joke about that's just winter. So thank you, Senator Cramer. I appreciate it.